All right. Hope you had a good break. Got to meet a new face, perhaps. And before we get to the next panel, I want to express just a lot of gratitude for the opportunity to be here with you today. It has been fantastic. I am going to, as we all do, head to the airport right after this gets started. You'll be in great hands after this. The editor-in-chief of the Houston Business Journal, Sean McCrory, will be here a little bit later for you. And now we get into a great sit-down with that great foundation that Harris and Lawrence really broke our brains open to think at both at 50 feet as well as 50,000 feet to look at two different industries and how they are definitely overlapping and some of the learning lessons. We are going to zoom out. The next session expands the lens globally. Around the world, as has been mentioned, countries are starting to see that cognitive health related to their population directly tied to economic performance, to their innovative capacity, and their social cohesion. As was mentioned earlier, I just came from a couple of weeks in UAE, and that was part of an AI and FinTech conference, this space. One of the focuses that they were looking at. So what we're gathering here is leaders from Argentina, India, Kenya, Europe, and Canada. They're going to share how they are advancing national brain health strategies, how they're fostering public-private collaboration, as well as tapping into the growing global market for neuro-innovation. Led by our good friend, George Vredenberg, chairman of the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, and as well chairman of Us Against Alzheimer's. This diverse group will tackle some big questions in the next bunch of minutes. The burgeoning global market for brain innovation, how countries, some of the learning lessons and benchmarks that we can look at, how they're taking a leading role in brain health. I saw a list of some of the questions that they'll be attacking here, talking about answer and answer. You're going to get a lot of answers and answers, and then we just have to go do it, as well as the implementation of those very ideas. Some of the discussants will be virtual, coming in from different parts of the world. Some also flew in from very afar to be with us in these chairs here. So it's really going to be a great dynamic conversation. Along with George, please welcome Fred Destresbeck, Executive Director, European Brain Council. You can clap for each one, he's virtual. Dr. Rajinder Damija, Professor of Neurology and Director, Institute of Human Behavior and Allied Sciences from New Delhi. Dr. Joseph Dieleman, Associate Professor, Department of Health Metric Sciences, University of Washington. Dr. Facundo Manes, Professor of Neurology, Behavioral Neurology and Cognitive Neuroscience, Favaloro University of Buenos Aires, Principal Investigator, National Scientific and Technical Research Council, National Deputy Argentina, President Committee on Science, Innovation, and Technology of the Argentinian Parliament. He's also virtual. Dr. Zul Morali, Founding Director of the Brain and Mind Institute, Aga Khan University, also virtual. And Dr. Jenny Young, Executive Director, Canadian Brain Research Strategy. A warm round of applause for all of them, please. Over to you, George.
Thank you, Richard. Safe flight. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being in this conversation. This conversation is happening around the world, and so some of this will be reflected in the conversations we have today. So there's a variety of friends that I've brought in from around the world. Some of them flew from India overnight, 20 hours, Dr. Rajinder. So thank you. You may recall that Kelly referred to a video, and I don't know how many people have seen it, about how to create a movement. It starts with somebody dancing on the side of a hill. How many people have seen that video? About a third, 40%. Well, the whole message of this is that one person dancing on the side of the hill, as creative and as great a dancer they are, is really not creating a movement. It's creating curiosity. It's creating a new way of thinking. But you need the second person to join the first person in order to try and create a movement, because then everybody says, oh, this is now an idea that you want to join. So Harris is the first answer. I'm the second answer. I come out of business. I'm a lawyer by background and training, but I've lost 3 generations of my family to a variety of dementias. A grandmother who died of senility, which is what they called it back in the day, when you thought that dying of some sort of withdrawal, and in this case withdrawal, was just a natural course of aging. A mother who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, but clearly now would have been diagnosed with Lewy bodies because she had hallucinations. Called us at 3 a.m. in the morning, said there's a man in the house stealing our money. Would you please come over? We came over immediately. We searched the house, couldn't find the thief. In fact, she pulled my wife aside and said, that's the man. It was her husband. She was hallucinating that her husband was stealing money from her. She had required us to go to the bank every day to make sure her money was still there. The bank said, we don't want our bank tellers being harassed. Please call your mother off. And we said, hell no. She wants to know if her money there. We kept going to the bank every day. And now a brother who had aphasia, but advancing a course of Alzheimer's, but he also had a serious heart ailment and was able to take advantage of the medical aid in dying statute in California. So 3 generations of my family. But that starts in 1980 to today. That's 45 years. If we don't speed up solutions to these problems, it's my kids, it's my grandkids, and it may be my great-grandkids. So that's what I come to this with. But I'm a lawyer by background and training, so I'm the least educated in all of these fields, if anyone in this audience. But I deeply appreciate all of your passion and commitment to getting at this issue. It was mentioned earlier that the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, which I chair, held a brain house at Davos in last January. And they brought together the mental health community, the neurodegenerative scientific community, large investors like Goldman Sachs, Silicon Valley, philanthropic investors, the Milken Institute, and a wide variety of others. Joachim Reiser was there to represent basically the health systems of the world. And we had enormous turnout. And what struck us with the WHO there and others was that there was this notion that, in fact, we're all talking slightly different tongues, but basically the same output. So we are, as you heard earlier, moving from this event, which is bringing together the business community and understanding the business community's motivation. We'll be going to the G7, and Jenny Young has been leading the effort in Canada to pull together the world around the G7 event. We'll move to the United Nations, move to Lausanne, Switzerland, where there's health leaders around the world coming together to solve these problems. But then we go to the G20 in South Africa in November, focusing on the Global South. The Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative was formed in order to link efforts in the Global North and the Global South. Most of the cases of dementia in the Global South. Now 2/3, it will go to 80% by 2050. So if we do not learn from the Global South and inform the Global South, two-way conversation, we are not going to be able to get at this problem globally. So that's what brings me to this. The way I think about this out of the business executive's history is the demographic shifts that are occurring in the world, which are inexorable but move at seemingly slow pace, are having a dramatic effect. Why is that? Because increasing brain disorders around the world are increasing costs, and social costs and economic costs, largely to governments around the world. And so governments are now being motivated to actually invest in the solution to such a large problem that they're confronted with, that they need to invest and they need to stimulate innovation. So we learned this in the United States because the way that we got from $400 million a year in investment in Alzheimer's research to now $4 billion a year, is in fact the argument that by 2050, the cost of caring for people with dementia in the United States is going to be $1 trillion. It will be as big as the Defense Department is today. And they said, if we're spending $400 million, which they were at the start of the conversation, against a problem that could rise to $1 trillion a year, we're really stupid. Any CEO who has a $1 trillion cost problem and is spending $400 million to solve that problem is really stupid. So they basically, over 10 years to 12 years, basically were able to raise that kind of money. But that's happening around the world because the brain health costs to government as an economic actor are rising at such a rate that in fact they are incented to invest. But that also represents an enormous business market for innovation in the space, because this is a global marketplace, and the brain is a single bodily organ that we start with and we end with, and it's the same one at the beginning of life and the same one at the end of life. How do we invest as innovators to bring about solutions to that problem with governments as a partner investor in this? The interesting part of what's happening is how is it that we can begin to think about government and industry investing in the solution to this problem. The other aspect of the problem of demography is that we have fewer workers to support larger populations. Now that's true in the global north and China, including China. So we have fewer workers supporting larger populations, which means that the existing workforce that we have has got to be more productive, or the material well-being of the whole world is going to decline. The Global South has a slightly different perspective. As they're seeing their aging populations grow, and they've seen what's happened in the North, they're worried about aging populations, but mightily, they are still producing a lot of babies. And they are looking at an investment in the resilience of brains as a worker productivity which will drive their economic growth. So in Africa, as you'll hear, and in Latin America, the sense of a life course investment in the future workforce of those continents is critical to their future in a slightly different way as well. And as we've learned through the Lancet work, in fact, we now know that the risk factors for Alzheimer's start at birth. They don't start in midlife, they don't start in late life, they start at birth. So the whole life course issue, even for an Alzheimer's person, is now a business issue and an economic issue in which we can induce a greater investment and greater paths to solutions. So I am really thrilled to talk about, with this extraordinary panel, first, what are the global costs of brain disorders? Which is both a problem for governments that have to support the care associated with those costs, but it's also the size of the market for potential investors who are seeking solutions to those problems. So we're going to start with Joel Dielman of IHME. The Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation is the foremost expert data gatherer about the global burden of disease. And so we're going to start with Joe and to talk about the size of the problem. Joe?
Great, thanks.
Probably you want some slides.
Great.
So these are the questions we're going to answer as we go through this. So the first question, upper left, how big is this market opportunity? And we're going to go to other countries and continents to talk about how they are approaching this as a public-private collaborations or not. And finally, we're going to talk a bit about AI and climate change.
Great, thanks so much. It's a privilege to be here. My name is Joe Dielman. Like George said, I work at the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, where we really believe fundamentally that by measuring outcomes, by measuring inputs, you can improve health. And so I've had the privilege of working with the Brain Health Initiative, working closely with George and Davos and others to think a lot about essentially how much are brain health disorders costing us. And we measure that in a few different ways. The first is just thinking about direct spending on healthcare. And so this figure that you're seeing above me right now is essentially just saying, how much do we spend globally on brain health disorders? And you can see a couple things that I want to point out that are really important. First is that it's growing tremendously over time. And so you can see that this is after adjusting for inflation. We estimate that from 2000 to 2019, there's been over 3.5% growth annually in expenditures on brain health disorders. The other is that there's some key diseases that are really costing us a great deal. Stroke, Alzheimer's stand out as a number of them. George, you want to click to the next slide? The other thing that's important is to recognize where that money is coming from. And so, of course, globally, the landscape of where spending on health is coming from is very skewed to high-income countries. And it's precisely in those high-income countries where we see that above 20% of healthcare spending is on brain health disorders. Now, I want to highlight in this figure, in this map, that in sub-Saharan Africa, we see substantially less spending per capita on brain health disorders. But we think, when we start to look prospectively, that this is going to change dramatically. By 2100, we know that over 3 billion people are going to live in sub-Saharan Africa. That's more than all of Asia combined. So sub-Saharan Africa will really be a center for population aging. The mean age in sub-Saharan Africa by that point will be above 40 years old. So a lot of the things that we're talking about right now that are really prevalent in much older populations, like high-income countries, are going to be very much a global issue, increasing over the course of this century. So the first way that we measure the cost of brain health disorders is looking on expenditures on the healthcare sector. The second is thinking about lost income due to brain health disorders. And so this is a figure that looks at people leaving the workforce because of brain health disorders. And a couple things important to recognize about this figure. First is we see a lot of mental health disorders leading to people leaving the workforce during their prime working ages. And so when we look just at the lost income from patients, from people living with brain health disorders, a lot of it is from the mental health disorders. Some of the health conditions that jump out are really high prevalence health conditions that a lot of people don't necessarily associate with huge loss, but because of their prevalence, they lead to really large economic burden. And so you see things like depression, see things like bipolar, things like anxiety, really lead to a really large toll on the economy. If you click to the last slide here, we start to ask, where is that most acutely felt? And here we actually see that in sub-Saharan Africa and some of the low-income countries in the world, that in terms of economic loss relative to their economy, there's some of the most loss in some of the poorest countries in the world. And so I think this highlights not only places that are going to be growing as far as expenditure is concerned, but places in the global south in particular where there's already a very large impact from brain health disorders on their economy. We see that globally, of course, in high-income countries as well, but I like to highlight that it's also very acute in low-income countries. So that ultimately is kind of two ways that we think about the economic cost of brain health disorders. And I want to emphasize finally that that's really the tip of the iceberg. And many of us have connections as caregivers. We've talked about that earlier today. That's not part of these numbers. And we have a separate project where we're measuring the economic impact of caregiving. In many cases, that's going to focus a lot on neurological disorders that come later in life, but caregivers are oftentimes leaving the workforce in order to provide care for those individuals. So the numbers I'm presenting today add up to about $3.5 trillion, but I want to emphasize that that is the tip of the iceberg, and that in many ways, the economic impacts of brain health disorders are much bigger than just what we're measuring.
So that says both an economic impact largely borne by governments, to a large part also by families, but it also is a rough estimate of what the size of the market is for those who can solve the problem. And so this is why governments are incented to invest. No better example, other than the US case, of Texas, where DPRIT basically has been argued as an economic imperative for the state of Texas because of the growing prevalence and costs of dementia inside Texas alone. And that's not including mental health. So DPRIT is being driven by this cost to governments and to the costs of to Texans and the economic impact on Texas. So this is a huge potential market and should, if we can get the investment incentives right, as between government, international development funds, and private sector, should be able to generate an enormous amount of additional investment to get at the solutions to these problems. Let me back up a second. Let me go back to I'm going to ask Dr. Deminja of India, it starts with an I, India, to talk about his work. He is the head of the government's Brain Health Task Force for India. And India has begun a national rollout of a plan that he'll describe to you. Raj, if you would just give a little background about the problem in India and what you're trying to do about it.
Thank you, and I must express my gratitude to George and Harris for having me here. I'm still a little jet lagged, but this is a proud privilege to be here, a learning experience, and I'm sure that by interacting, we would be giving insight from a global south country with a population of 1.4 billion and counting. So you can very well imagine it's not a country, it's a continent from a very heterogeneous population with a very different religions, different cultures, and different socio-economic parameters in the country. So coming to Joseph, the total, the expenditure from the government side of the total GDP is less than 1% on the health. So we are the 5th largest economy in the world as of today and aspiring to be 3rd largest economy in next 20 years. So obviously it's a huge market, huge economy, 1.5 billion people. But at the same time, the total expenditure on health is less than 1% from the public funding. That means from the government funding. And from public and private, it's about 6 to 7%. That means the private players or the corporate players or the industry, healthcare industry is pitching up in a bigger way than the government itself. Having said that, the brain problems, as we have seen from different evidence from the Lancet, from the other IHME studies, the total numbers of people having dementia is huge. It's huge coming up because we have a double whammy. The people having 35% of total population is less than 35 years of age. But at the same time, people living more than 60 years is also increasing around 20% by 2030. So 20% in terms of absolute numbers becomes 300 million people living more than 60 years of age as of today. And these are not healthy individuals. They all have lifestyle problems. They all have risk of developing cognitive impairment and dementia. And of course, we have known that 40% of these neurocognitive disorders or neurodegenerative disorders are preventable, including the strokes. They are preventable cause of vascular dementia, levoparty, Alzheimer's, and DLB, and other forms of dementia. So it's a huge problem. It's a giant looking at us, and that is why the Government of India in April 24 constituted a national task force on brain health by the NITI Aayog, that is the Planning Commission of India, which is now National Institute for Transforming India, that is NITI. And that task force is now working to frame policy, how to handle, how to tackle the huge problem of neurological disorders, which varies from the children affected by the neurodevelopmental disorders, autism spectrum disorders, learning disabilities, specific learning disabilities, intellectual impairments, and mental problems, as well as strokes and head injuries and traumatic spinal cord injuries, as well as the neurodegenerative disorders like dementia, Parkinson's, and other problems of aging. So to face that huge challenge, this task force is mandated to provide policy framework to the Government of India for the preventive, promotive, curative, rehabilitative, and palliative services for the people of India. So that task force consists of many stakeholders under my chairmanship, including neurologists, including policymakers, including the financial, the economists, and from the industry and from the private hospitals and major big hospitals in the country. So we have had so many meetings, and we have had the meetings from the experts, contributions from the England, from UK, US, from Canada, from Australia, including Harris. So we are now in the process of formalizing a report, which is about 500 pages report, which will be presented to the Honorable Prime Minister of India, who is the head of the Planning Commission, under which the National Task Force is working. So that document will come up in next couple of months in a program which will be rolled out throughout the country. To begin such a pilot project, before I came here yesterday, a couple of days back, we have started brain health clinics in the state of Delhi, which was earlier in one state. So we have rolled out the first brain health clinic, dedicated service to the patients having neurological disorders right from the childhood throughout the life course, and this will involve all the brain health problems, including their screening, including their preventive modification of the preventable risk factors, including their acute treatment, whether it is hyperacute, acute, or ongoing continuum of treatment, as well as rehabilitation and coming back, integrating back to the community. So this has a huge potential in terms of preventing from the government side. Now coming to the private side, that's also equally important, as 70 to 80% of the healthcare is provided by the private players in the country, and that is again a huge market, and that market is expanding as such, providing this segment of the society which can afford a very high ultra-tech treatment, high-end treatment as comparable to as anywhere in the world, as well as providing to the poorest of the poor people. And mind you, 50 million people go beyond the poverty line because of the out-of-pocket expenses to the health care. So that's again a huge problem for the country, for the government, to how to handle that out-of-pocket expenses for these people who cannot afford the treatment as expensive as for the anti-amyloid treatment or any expensive biomarkers or things like that. So that is from the private sector, and as recently the industries, the confederation of the Indian Chamber of Commerce, the SOCHAM, as well as the other associations of the industries have come together to create Illness to Wellness Foundation, which caters to the mental health as well as brain health of their, not only of their workforce, but also in the community. So they are having a big program on the brain health, including mental health, for the community as such, and as well as for the workforce, to improve their brain resilience as well as the cognitive reserve. So these are the things which are happening in a very big sphere from the government side as well as from the private side. India is a hub of vaccine manufacturer. India is a factory for the generic medications, which all of you have seen during the HIV epidemic, and we are the largest producer of generic drugs. And I believe that there is a huge potential for India to produce anti-amyloid treatments as well as the GLP-1 treatment for the diabetes and for other ailments, and that is where the huge market from the industry is looking at us, and we need to tap that potential. So in India, I am a professor of clinical neurology. So a professor and a politician, once you give them the mic, it's very difficult to stop them. So obviously, I'll stop here before you ask me.
No, that's terrific, Raj. I'm curious as to whether you've basically described a health system transformation using brain health navigators,
Yes.
or we would call them navigators, you call them brain health clinics, to identify the nature of the disorder and presumptively then give them whatever treatments are available, yes, but also lifestyle factor coaching.
Absolutely.
Is there an additional investment being made? How much of these who is investing in these brain health clinics? Is it the government, or is it industry, or is it what?
Yes. So these brain health clinics are financed by the government of India as of now, but the health is a state subject in India. So every state has its health budget. On top of that, the centrally sponsored schemes, they are financing the state governments to come up with the brain health clinics. So brain health clinics is a holistic, total care for all the individuals who are suffering from the neurological disorders or who are at risk of developing neurological disorders. And of course, dementia is one such big problem, because India does not have a welfare system for the old age homes or the nursing homes. It's a family-based rehabilitation or family-based care, and we are providing care for that. And not only the training of the caregivers, but also the patients, their respite, and the healthcare providers to tune into and to care for those patients. So financing is basically, majority of it comes from the government side, but now of late, the private sector in terms of healthcare industry and insurance is coming up to tide of the crisis.
Terrific. Well, it's amazing what India is doing, and good luck in your execution and implementation. And hopefully we will be able to stimulate enough global investment in the innovations to reduce your costs and alleviate your
and yes, I think this national task force from the government of India is, I think, the first of its kind in the global south, and we're looking at helping the other countries in the global south for the learning from each other and helping them to develop brain health action plans for their respective countries.
Well, let me stay at the, thank you for flying 20 hours to get here too. So, I mean, I really do appreciate that. We ought to give him a hand simply for that.
Thank you for having me.
Let's stay in the global south for a moment. I'm going to introduce Zul Morali from Nairobi, Kenya, where he is central to an African effort, a continent of Africa effort on an African brain health plan, and a partner of the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative. So Zul, just a moment or two of introduction, and then how are you bringing the different sectors together in approaching this problem in Africa?
Thank you, George. Thank you for being inviting us here for the discussion. I was Zul Morali, I'm the founding director of the Brain and Mind Institute at the African University, and we have a hub here in Nairobi, Kenya, that serves East Africa, Kenya, and Tanzania, and another hub in Karachi that serves South and Central Asia. Our focus primarily is on brain health and mental health. So I wanted to essentially reflect on what Raj was saying. There is so much similarity between what India is experiencing and what's the reality in Africa. But there's a couple of stark differences. And one is that the young population in Kenya is growing enormously fast. And I think that, as Joe was telling us, I think it's going to be the reservoir of the largest number of young people globally by 2050. And so that's one aspect. And the other aspect is that because the communicable diseases have come more under control, people are aging more normally in Africa as compared to the past, and as a consequence, the Asian population is also rising very quickly, anticipated 300% increase by 2050 again. So there is a growth of older population and the youth. And so here is a very interesting approach that we need to take. Based on what Raj was saying, this concept of across the lifespan and creating infrastructure within the country to deal with brain health is an excellent idea. I don't think we're there quite yet, but certainly applying to do that very quickly, at least in our settings. But what's interesting is that in terms of the economic implications, I think that it is clear now that when in Kenya or in Africa, we used to invest a lot in abroad, mining, agriculture, things like that, we're now shifting to the brain from abroad. And essentially, the new generation is going to be more focused on brain-based skills and capital. And so here is a challenge, because if the brain health is not well looked after, it's going to have major ramifications going forward, particularly the economy of the country. And not only that, I think that Africa is going to become, is going to be exporting a lot of young people to meet the demands of the global north, where the young population is declining rather rapidly. So that this kind of a circle that is being driven by the technology and AI and using the brain power and education as an engine, as a driver, is very important and has souls and brain health, because without the brain health, you're going to compromise that capacity development. So with that, I'll stop and maybe leave for further reflections on what you may have asked, George.
Zul, describe a bit the 5-year plan that you're now about to publish and then about to try to execute through a series of work streams.
Yes, so I think that what we're planning to do essentially is we've developed a strategy of 5-year strategy using a 6 major initiatives to address some of the concerns that have come to visibility in terms of how we can better invest in brain health. And so amongst some of them, one of the major ones is essentially developing a more integrated approach across Africa. Because in the developing countries, when the resources are very limited, people tend to become very siloed in their approach. And that has created a shortage of the actual data that is contributing to the global pool of information. And so I think that one of the strategies that we're focusing on in this 655 framework that George is mentioning is that we need to figure out a way of harnessing data that's collected in a more unified, sort of more harmonized way, so that we can then address the gap in knowledge. If you look at the gap in knowledge, the information that's coming in from Africa is a small, very small, less than 2% of the information that's contributing to the global pool of information. And so that's an approach that comes to mind that is major in terms of what we need to do to go with that. Because I think that if we don't address that issue, we will continue to be not contributing to the knowledge pool. The risk being that, as we discussed so far already, that since the majority of people border habits are going to be in the continent of Africa and go to the south, the treatments that we are developing based on the information that we have gathered from the global north, from Europe and America, may or may not be most appropriate for the treatments that are needed in the global south. I'll give you an example. When we talk about ApoE, that is a risk factor for which now the trade has started moving towards developing drugs for addressing that genetic aggregation. That is not as relevant in populations in Africa. And so, unless we convey that picture very clearly, then the trade will be on the track developing a treatment that might then leave behind 80% of the elderly that or older populations that might not benefit from that treatment. So we need to be informing. So research is so critically important and harmonized with data. So I'll leave it there for now, George, and we can kind of discuss that further.
I'll come back to you on the diagnostic techniques that you're doing in Africa that have to drive down the cost of diagnosis and the cost of detection of this disease way below the cost of the global north. So innovation in the south may end up teaching the global north exactly how to get the cost of detection, cost of diagnosis down. Facundo Manos, you're here. Facundo is a major legislative figure in the Parliament of Argentina who had a vote today, and I thought you were going to be later, but you're pretty much on time. But he's also a neurologist, a major figure in the neurology field in Argentina, and also a major political figure in Argentina, probably not aligned with the current party. That's my comment, not his. Facundo, your observations about the possibility of improving the state of the world in Latin America as you think through these challenges.
Thank you, George. Good morning to everyone. Yes, as George said, I have a diploma session, so I might have to leave early, but I am lucky that I can be with you today. I am speaking for Latin America. Latin America is a place full of talent. We are living in the knowledge economy. We are facing a new industrial revolution in which we not only produce things or create things like the previous industrial revolution, but this new revolution, industrial revolution, is changing us in the course. the fusion of the digital world, the biological world, and countries and companies must learn how to capitalize on their people mental resources if they want to prosper. Helping the brain grow in a healthy way is not only a mental issue, it's also important for the economy, for the sustainable stress, and hurts the brain for a long time. And this affects productivity, education, work, and mental health. This is why we need strong and long-term actions. And countries must work together and treat brain health as a global priority, like climate change, migration, and geopolitical questions. We need to put brain economy, brain cancer, brain health top priorities in the global agenda. And in Argentina, we are already working in a national plan. I wrote a law bill for brain health, and yesterday, the Health Committee of Congress approved this plan. Now we have to discuss the bill in the floor. And the plan includes early detection, public education, support for family caregivers, and money for research in the whole country, around the country. But it also does more. It puts brain health at the center of the national policy for development. In Latin America, we are showing that brain science and politics can work together to improve lives. As global leaders in the G20, G7, and United Nations, we must focus on 5 key actions. Put money in brain health and fairness, support national brain health plans, train new professionals in brain health, protect caregivers, and make prevention as a top priority. The job of the future, for which we have to be prepared today, will value those skills that make us human, that technology cannot imitate or replace. And now I want to talk about one big opportunity, the silver economy. This means jobs and service for all the publics in health, housing, education, sport, and technology. In Latin America, we already see new companies, community groups, and care networks. And many of them are led by women. We must support this movement, not as something small, but a smart plan for growth. And let me finish with one strong idea. The next big change is not only about technology. It is about people. A change of empathy, new ideas, creativity, and mental well-being. A brain revolution. Investing in the brain is investing in the future. Thank you.
Let me move now to the global north and Fred Desterbeck, the European Brain Council, who has been very active at the European level and with the European Union, and now is working on a European brain health plan and financing as part of the Europeans' Horizon efforts there. So, Fred, what's happening in Europe?
Hello, George, and hello everyone, all the friends we have in the room today. Very sorry that I could not be with you for this very important meeting that I was held in meeting in Brussels in public later that yesterday we had the announcement of the launch of the youth mental health plan at new level. It has been fantastic endeavor for us to look forward to what is actually going on at the European level. that you alluded to another let's say, the building block in our strategy, which is called the European Partnership for Brain Health, that was just concluded last week in a big meeting in Riga in Latvia, and where we basically agreed amongst all the member states of the European Union, also with third countries collaborating, as well as the European Commission, to put a budget together for the emergence of a neuroscience ecosystem at the European level. It is now in the range of 500 million is committed for that endeavor, and we hope that we can now convince additional investors, the European Bank for Investment, as well as the industry, to really contribute to that effort, and that we are now putting setting that effort into place in order to really catalyze the effort in making sure that the neuroscience ecosystem is principle and can as per the wish of the European Commission. So the partnership will start in January 2026, very formally. But as you can see, we have engaged in this work since a couple of years, because it is really the outcome of a relentless effort in making sure that the relentless effort into action was recognized. And this is basically what justifies our work on the global stage, and the fact that we have been engaging with many of you in the room in contexts such as the UN General Assembly, New York on a daily basis. We also Davos for the G7, and also the recent one we have facilitated the emergence of a global brain coalition. The idea was really to make sure that we could bring together all like-minded partners to advance the policy recognition of supporting policy for the brain. We are hoping now to see a resolution to be adopted by the United Nations. We are very encouraged to see the World Economic Forum embracing not only the need to see brain health as a priority, which is the first cause of disability, the second cause of mortality worldwide, but also a main contributor to socioeconomic disparity. But we are also embracing brain capital and brain economic narrative, because we see the potential that it brings in terms of, as the previous speaker in the panel was said, is really drive to the positive development policy. And I would like to really conclude by inviting you to join us in the different meetings and opportunities for engagement that we will be generating from our perspective, contributing to the partnership, contributing to additional policy opportunities, but also generating the platform for engagement, because this notion of strategic alignment will come more and more to the fore as a key priority for the Union. So on the 16th of June 2020, we organized a webinar discussing the potential for developing a global brain research agenda, and our warmly welcome to join. And in September, we will also organizing for the fourth time the Brain Health and Research Day in the Science Summit at the General Assembly of the United Nations, with many of you in the room. George, we welcome your contribution in that respect. And last but not least, we organize also the Brain Innovation Day with the top platforms for this notion of international collaboration mid-October in Brussels. So as you can see, as we look into the program, we are really welcoming this type of connection, and we are very inspired by the development having occurred in Texas, more particularly. And we are even fortunate as an example now to inspire all the others as well. So we're really pleased to be connecting with you virtually this morning for you, and look forward to upcoming contacts and further opportunities.
Thank you very, very much, Fred, for your leadership in Europe and at the UN General Assembly. All of this narrative that you're beginning to see grow around the world is pretty consistent of what countries are doing. They're taking it seriously at the national level, and the narrative is getting clearer and clearer. The challenge now is, what does that narrative produce in terms of actions? What do we have to change in the world to actually change from a situation where brain diseases are increasingly prevalent, increasingly a cost, where we want to stimulate the investment and innovation needed to change? So our last speaker, purposefully, is Jenny Young from Canada, who is leading the effort on the bringing in all sectors of society to talk about what the brain health and brain capital and the brain economy mean to them, and what actions should we begin to describe in terms of changes in industry, investment, and public policy and the like. So I'm going to give this to Jenny because she's running the process that will produce a major convening at the G7 in Calgary, Canada in the middle of June. So Jenny, describe what you're doing and how we're going to get from narrative to action.
Thank you, George. And first I want to say thank you for having me here. It's a real thrill and honor. I grew up in northern Alberta in the oil sands, and I think there's a lot of parallels between Alberta and the success that we've seen here in Texas and Houston, and I really wish we could learn from you. So thank you. So I'll give a bit of background and context for Canada first. So we do not yet have a national brain health plan. But what we have done at CBRS is to lead the creation of this roadmap of a national plan for how we can improve brain and mental health of all Canadians. And it's rooted and grounded in research, but really looking at long-term impact on health and society. So we built this with the directors of 40 neuroscience and mental health research institutes in Canada, as well as 40 other organizations, health charities, nonprofits, private foundations, patient organizations, and research funders as well. What's notably missing, in this largely private and philanthropic partnership is really the business component. And there is a lot of opportunity for business to lead in Canada and globally, I would argue. And so, as George mentioned, to show this kind of leadership, it's not just a problem that we face in Canada, but globally, as you've heard from all of the other speakers. And this is why we're using the G7 as a natural platform to scale this kind of alignment across all sectors of society, notably including business. And so with this summit, basically what we're trying to do is to show government that brain health is more than just a health issue, that it really impacts all sectors of society. And we hope you will join us, and that's why there's a QR code for you to register. Today is the registration deadline. But the discussions are structured around the G7 engagement groups, and that's because they cover all sectors of society. And business has a very important part to play because you are able to impact all sectors of society, whether it's workforce mental health that you're supporting, whether it's training future workers and upskilling our workers, and also in terms of what was the last one? Investing and scaling in brain health innovation. And so we are using this summit as an opportunity to show government that it is a cross-sectoral issue, but also to showcase the work that's already being done across all sectors of society. And business has this opportunity to showcase the work that it's doing. And in this way, show government that there are things that are already happening in those areas that are already listed, and there are concrete actions that we can take. Because I think a lot of times, brain health seems like such a big, massive, complex issue that it seems almost daunting to take on, but by showing government that many people in many sectors are already taking these steps, we can show government that it can be done, and also to start working across sectors to make an impact. And so in addition to the virtual roundtables, which we're going to hold a week from today, we are also going to have an in-person event in Calgary that's at the same time as the G7 Leader Summit that's happening nearby in Kananaskis, and really be able to show the potential and the work that's already being done and across all these countries and efforts as well.
Well, thank you, Jenny, for your leadership in Canada and with this G7 work. As was hinted in earlier, we're trying to use 2025, moving from narrative and these large thematic things like it's a life course issue. What points of life ought we to have interventions? How do we, in fact, get maternal health built into thinking about this? How do we get youth mental health and education and other brain-enhancing elements into the way the globe works? How do we get midlife interventions where we know a lot of the risk factors associated with this disease, later life disease evolves? But also where that's a working age population. And the youth is the future working age population. So figuring out how to turn this narrative of life course interventions in both suppressing brain disorders and solving the problem, but also in terms of developing brain resilience and brain reserve, cognitive reserve, is all the challenge of turning all this great talk into action. And so we need to begin to identify both measures that we can hold ourselves responsible for in terms of trying to change these sectoral responses, but also track it. And so one idea on the table is to begin to develop a COP-like week-long effort somewhere in the world, probably in 27 or 28, that we basically bring everybody together and really kind of get huge investments and innovations. It's already happening at the national level with Fred's work at the UN General Assembly. It's beginning to penetrate at a global level. Davos itself is a venue for putting it on the global agenda. We actually convened something called the Brain House in Davos 2025, where we basically brought all these elements together and got some agreement on this narrative, but now Davos 2026 is to, okay, what's the action plan? So Jenny is leading that effort in the G7 context. Fred will pick up sort of the baton, as it will, at the UN General Assembly work, where we're partnering with him on that. And then we'll take it to the G20 to make sure that we focus as well as the opportunities for the global south. So I think it's all linearly, you can understand where we're going as we move from the narrative and the idea to an action plan. And so that's the goal for 2026, is to basically get that global action plan. It'll involve the nutrition industry. It'll involve women's health in a much more dramatic and signal way than we've focused on women's health in the past, both as mothers, but as largely the socialization process that a child goes through and how they're raised, but also midlife menopause issues that create potential risk for late life disease. So women's health will be a bigger piece, I think, of this than has historically been a focus, but it is also business who sees this as a worker productivity issue and the things that they will do in order to retain workers longer, in order to meld you, a good employee, to their companies, has, it turns out, a very deep overlap with what is necessary to be preventative for late life health. So motivation, purpose, meaning, creative problem-solving skills. So I'm going to ask one last question, but I welcome any questions from the audience as we go through this last question, and I'm going to ask about AI. Is AI a danger or an assist? I remember reading a book about the history of memory, and books were thought to be the destroyer of memory, because basically people memorize their speeches, memorize poetry, memorize books, memorize spiritual texts, and they thought that actual books were going to destroy memory. And when I grew up, I used a slide rule in high school. And then they brought these little calculators, and they said, oh, that's going to destroy our arithmetic and calculation skills. What do you mean you don't do long division? Why is it that we're going to destroy your capacity? The internet came along, and basically people thought that was, all of these advances in the long term can have a basic positive effect on society, but they also have side effects, as we've seen with social media, addictive characteristics of social media, So we have to both balance what we can gain and extract in good, but at the same time be very, very mindful of the guardrails we need to put on it. I went to AOL in its early days, and one of the first things I was asked by Steve Case is, how do we figure out what the values are that should drive this new medium? And what should government do, and what should business do? Because we should share values with government. And if we ignore government and policy and what will make us a trusted medium, we are going to make mistakes, and government will come down in ways that will be arbitrary. And if we don't get that balance between policy and business correct, we are going to not have the best and most effective development of the internet. So this notion of balancing policy to protect children, policy to protect against fraud, policy to protect the consumer, the medium is not going to be trusted. And strikingly, we're seeing that in the sort of the second and third generations of the internet, where we're having all these side effects, which we don't have the guide rails for, and it's tough to fix it later. And so we've suffered some social consequence. So I'm going to ask in the next 5 minutes just a quick, so I gave my own lecture. I fell in the same trap that you were marking, Raj, of speaking too much, of AI, the effect of AI, or climate change. Pick your two.
So I'll just start with the action, from policy to action. So the government of India is going to launch the world's largest brain health action plan. So about half of the population, which is around 350 districts of India, will have brain health clinics, what we call navigators, in next few months to roll out, and that would be the huge step forward for the action from the policy. So that is from the government side. Coming to, I'll choose both, 1 minute for each. Neuroclimate. The Neuroclimate Working Group is in India, is now becoming an international hub to see the effects of air pollution on the brain development, right from the fetal life to the exposure in terms of number of years, and what effects does it have on mental health, as well as the first 1,000 days of the brain development. So these are the things which are happening in the field of neuroclimate. Coming to AI, AI is a boon, I personally believe, but artificial intelligence can never replace the real intelligence. So the real intelligence will stay, but of course we have to tap the beneficial effects of the artificial intelligence in terms of diagnostics, in terms of treatment, in terms of where we live now, but we have to have a better use of that. How we use it depends on us. Whether we take that advantage of the AI, or we take the bad effects of AI in terms of screen time, in terms of other things, they are again harmful for your brain development and for cognitive results. So both ways, one has to take balance, as you said.
Jenny, I'll go to you next. You're here.
Thanks. So even though our government does not have a national brain health plan, we have taken actions to invest in a brain economy, and they just haven't seen that yet. And that's because Canada was one of the first countries to create and adopt a pan-Canadian strategy on AI. We've also created a national strategy on quantum technologies. And all of this investment in deep tech is really part of the investment that's needed for the brain economy. As Rajendra mentioned, not only are we using these tools to increase our understanding of the brain, but we really also will benefit with the therapeutics and the treatments that will come out of this. But at the same time, our understanding of the brain is going to feed into better AI models and better applications of quantum technology. And that's because AI was really founded on our initial understanding of how the brain works. And so we really need to invest and to see this investment in brain health as part of a virtuous cycle, where if you invest in brain health and brain research, that will lead to better development of AI and other deep tech, and that will then feed into, again, more impacts on brain health.
Thank you, Jenny. Zul, AI or climate change? Take your pick.
Climate change, I think, in Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, is a major issue because you know the deserts are growing due to climate change and droughts and changing rain patterns and stuff like that. So when I go to the field, it's very clear to me as people talk about the impact of climate change. They're worried about, they can't predict anymore about the success of their agricultural or planting cycles and success in harvesting. So it is really, it's a double way. One is that it's impeding nutrition, it's impeding production of food, but it also can lead to, as you were discussing earlier about the child and mother health. Malnutrition is a major contributor to brain ill health down the road, and so it's contributing to that as well. And last but not least, it is the stressor. That is, because you cannot predict anymore like you used to be able to, there's a lot of stress on people because they're not able to plan properly and worry about losing their livelihood in a split second. So I think that climate change is certainly a huge issue, no doubt about that. But when it comes to AI, I think that the genie is already out of the bottle as far as I'm concerned. And this is what's different about the AI is that in the past we had program development that could actually be guided by humans. Now we have kind of flipped the paradigm so that the machines can think for themselves and plan for themselves. And so how it is going to impact humans if you put the guardrails that needed to be there. Now can you do it or at the horse's such a bar? I think that that's the question. It is a very powerful tool, and but it may be very beneficial. Can be or can be very harmful. And I think that only time will tell us where we are going. And I think that we need to be a lot more vigilant than we have been as governments and as communities to have a say on where this technology is going.
Thank you, Zul. And Fred, bring us home. Joe, I'm going to come back to you at the end for a comment on AI, but Fred?
Yeah, thank you, George, and probably for Zul to take both issues, if I may, very briefly. First, climate change, politically in the context of what we have been calling the climate crisis after the COVID-19 particularly. And basically, that's a context that has been particularly among young people, depression and anxiety skyrocket because of the level of unpredictability, no work, and George, I can only echo what you were saying about the need to restore consideration, purpose, safety in the environment and environmental expression. So when it comes to social media, new technology, we are probably having a new revealing factor of existing trend, and that are probably accelerating the trend among the young population. And when it comes to AI, which is probably more than you can say, and we need to express, we are no longer facing what books were represented in the past or what we said about the calculator, which is actually a comparison and a recommend. But now we are really facing a technology that can completely overtake human beings or the capacity of cognitive power as human beings. So we probably need to teach particularly our young generation how to develop skills that will probably be impossible for machine to learn ever. That means critical thinking, in particular, that has been recognized that we never learn skill which should all be developing in that individual. And I just would like to finish up by sharing with you an example. I was particularly shocked when I read that AI was able to cheat when it was being tested against the human without having repeat instruction. So that means that there are no many human beings even more than what we thought could be possible.
Joe, finish this off here.
Great, thanks so much. I broadly agree with what's already been said, but especially wanted to highlight what Zul added, that in many ways, the genie's already out of the bottle. I think asking the question, of is AI going to be good or bad for brain health and brain capital is important, but I think the far more important question is in really practical terms, how do we encourage those positive components and how do we mitigate the losses? It's less right now, I think, about is it going to be good and bad, but what can we do given that it's here? And I don't have answers to that question, but I think that's the real important question to be asking.
I must thank this extraordinary panel from around the world. Thank you. If you come to brain health events this year and next year and the following years, you're going to see these leaders back as they advance their own national efforts and as we advance a global effort to put this on the global agenda and bring some global solutions to a number of these problems.